Nancy Ridge Farm, and today, well, this past week, I have been dividing dahlias. I've had them stored in boxes in the flower shop here. The flower shop used to be our carport, and we enclosed it for me to do all of my flower things. So in the winter, it's been nice and cool in here, especially on this concrete floor. So we've had our dahlias stored in here, And then now that it's springtime, we moved them into our greenhouse so they could start waking up. So they have been waking up, they've been doing their job, and now it's time for me to divide them because we need to be planting them soon. I'm dividing them because as a flower farmer, I'm trying to increase my stock. It's not necessary for the health of the plant. They suggest, I think, every 3 years for dividing, just like any kind of perennial, etc. But I am knee-deep in dividing dahlias, and I think I probably watched every video out there, and I think it's a little bit, people are making it a little more complicated than it needs to be, especially just for the home gardener. Now, if you were doing this to sell tubers, you might want to be a little bit more detailed and careful, and making sure that you see all the eyes, yada yada. But for my sake, I'm not selling these. I am just dividing them to get them planted out in my field. And for the most part, that's probably what you're doing too. So I want to show you what I do. Alright, these are dahlia tubers. Dahlias grow from tubers. They can grow from seed, but in order to get the exact same plant that you had, you have to take the tubers and divide them to get the same clone as the parent plant. You do not get that from the seed. So this is dahlia tubers, and I want to show you here. You see that sprout coming up? That sprout is coming up from an eye, and you can see right beside it there's a swollen eye. So that's where you know another sprout is coming. So around, this is the old stalk, and around that crown is where you're usually going to find those eyes that I'm talking about. So there's another one, and they're usually like in this area, and they will start to swell as that plant starts to wake up. Sometimes they'll even be on the underneath. Like, I would probably assume there would be some in here, probably in here. But when you're making a cut, you have to make sure that you have your tuber, your storage component, you have a neck, a good neck, and you have the eye that goes with it. If you have all of that, you're going to have a good plant to come up. If your tuber is cut, that's not a big deal. It will heal. If your neck is broken off, I probably wouldn't keep that. It's not going to serve that eye in any way. But the main thing you want to have is that eye. If you don't have a sprout coming up, you're not going to have a plant. Sometimes if a tuber breaks off, it can still put on roots, but it's not going to give you a viable plant. So you have to make sure that eye is with it. So whenever I'm looking at a large, basically, bundle of tubers together, the first thing I want to do is see, where do I make my first cut? And a lot of times all I'm going to do is just start by cutting it in half. That way I can have a more manageable, it's just more manageable to handle in that way. And I will usually, if there's two different stalks, I will cut between those. But I'm just going to start and cut through the middle. We'll kind of see where we need to make the cut. So there's an eye there, an eye here. And you can go through and kind of like extract out those. But I usually just cut. So I'm going to make a cut through here. Try not to damage that. I'll have the wrong snips. I like these needle nose ones because you can actually really get in there. And usually wherever it wants to come apart, that's where I will let it do its thing. Wherever it naturally wants to break apart. And sometimes you're going to sacrifice a tuber doing that. But to me, it's worth it to be able to actually get a hold of it and get it into more manageable chunks, to sacrifice an eye for the sake of being able to get it apart. So this is more manageable, and it already wants to come apart here. So that has an eye. That's a good one. This has an eye. And so this wants to come apart here. I go ahead and have these two apart as well. So that one has an eye there, and it probably will have one over here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this in half as well. Just to get that bit off. Alright, so, and I'll leave these bundles together, just like that. So now I have all of these. You don't have to get it down this much. If all you want to do is just cut it in half, and then you have two different sets of tubers, and you want to plant it just like that, you absolutely can. You don't have to keep going down and try to get it into smaller parts. And I feel like that's where it gets complicated. You don't have to go through and try to extract out every single eye that you see. All you have to do is just go through, cut it in half, being careful. Cut it in half, and you can leave it just like that. You don't have to go any further if you want to. The purpose is just how much do you want to plant? Do you have enough space to keep dividing these out? Do you have a purpose for wanting to divide it further? As long as you have the eye, that's all you have to worry about. It doesn't have to be beautiful and neat. I've been doing this all week. As long as they're not really swollen yet, but I have a very good feeling there's probably eyes up here and through there. You just kind of have a knack for it after you've done it a while, but you don't need that. All you need to know is the general area that the eyes would be in, which is right up here on the crown. This is that old stem, and that's where those eyes will be at. Same with this one. I could probably do this down a couple more. We'll go through here. And not everybody's going to want to make the same cut that you do, and that's fine. So you can make it go further, or you can just keep it in half if you want to. You don't have to go any further. The main thing is that you have an eye on everything that you're cutting, so that you're having a viable plant. And for the most part, you will. I don't really worry about if I'm going to have an eye or not, as long as I'm cutting. And I know the general area that an eye is going to be in, then I don't worry about it, because most likely there's going to be one. Sometimes, like I said, they'll be on this underside. Alright, so if you have a dahlia tuber and it's got any decaying, dried out bits, just break those off, cut them off. If they're really, really shriveled and you can tell it's just a dead tuber, then cut it off. This still has some firmness to it, so I would just say that it just needs to be hydrated. It's just desiccated a little dried out, doesn't mean that it's dead. But I wanted to show you these two eyes that are coming up really well, and you can see them. So what some people will do is you're cutting these out, trying to be very gentle. Okay, so this is kind of like what a standard tuber that you see. You have the body of the tuber, you have a good neck, and you have an eye. So you know that this is going to be a viable plant. It doesn't have to look like this every time. You saw the other ones. I mean, if we just went through and cut this in half, cut clusters of tubers together, that's all that you have to do. It doesn't have to look professionally done every time. There's no need for that, unless, like I said, you are trying to sell tubers. Otherwise, I would not worry about it and just cut them in half, cut them in thirds, make sure you feel confident that you have some eyes with it, and you can leave that chunk as is. I can see there's 2 eyes. There's eyes over here and one over here. I'll cut that in half because I feel pretty confident that both of these will grow. So that was into 4. If a tuber just breaks off, every now and then a tuber will break off and it'll start to sprout. But for the most part, these broken off ones are not going to have an eye because they were broken off at the neck and not high enough towards that crown of around the stem of the plant. So they were probably broken off somewhere around here. There's no eye down here. This is not usable. I just go straight to the compost bin because it will not make a plant. You have to make sure you have an eye, the neck, and the body of the tuber, and that's not always necessary either to have that body. If this was cut in half, I'd still plant it. I've planted ones that only had this little area here with the part of a neck and the eyes, and it still grew into a plant. This is just the energy source for this plant. Just like any other bulb, it uses the energy from that bulb to sprout, to grow. So it's the next day. We're still dividing dahlias. I've got my sidekick here in the pack and play. So he's been hanging out with me while I divide and listening to music and podcasts, because what else do you do when you're stuck and dividing dahlias? So if you're a flower farmer or farmer and you do this kind of stuff, you know it just takes time. And it's just something that has to be done. So making the most of it. I am getting through it, almost done. I probably have a couple more days to it, just because I'm not sitting here all day and doing it, just kind of sitting, doing a couple of varieties, knocking them out, next day doing the same thing. So little by little. I hope this gave you the confidence to get your dahlia tubers. You can get them at any garden center, I'm sure. And they'll usually come in clusters of the tuber sets like that. So you can go ahead and cut them apart and have more plants than you paid for. And don't be worried about trying to get the perfect cut. Just cut it in half, cut it in thirds, cut it in quarters, however you want to do it. Just make sure that you have an eye. That's the most important thing. So I appreciate it. Thanks for watching and continuing to support our farm, and we'll see y'all next time.